And now, from the Room 111 studios, it's Hacking Engagement with James Sternovich.
Well, hey there, listener, and welcome back to the Hacking Engagement podcast, and I'm so glad you're here. About 20 years ago, I took this personality profile test called the Myers Briggs. I bet a lot of people have taken the Myers Briggs, and what I came up with, and this will mean something to some people, not mean anything to others, is ENFP. And what's relevant or germane for this conversation is the E stands for extroverts. In other words, I'm one of those guys. I'm one of those guys that puts myself out there and thoroughly enjoys the process of putting myself out there. I'm one of those guys that points down the hallway at people and says, "Hey, how you doing?" I'm one of those guys. Well, there's a lot of students in my class that aren't one of those guys. And in fact, probably a third of my students are introverts. And sometimes I probably really get on their nerves. And what's worse is extroversion seems to be the gold standard of the American public education system. In other words, we love our extroverts. They're the volunteers. We love our extroverts. Many teachers are extroverts. We like being on stage. But today we're going to talk to an expert on this subject. Her name is Crissy Romano. She's a wonderful elementary teacher from New Jersey, and she's an introvert. And she's written about introversion, and she's spoken on introversion. And she is going to help us do a number of things. Develop empathy for introverts. She's going to help us appreciate the special strengths of introverts. She's going to help us accept introverts and stop trying to change them. And finally, she's going to give us some direction on how we can help introverts blossom. Buckle up, man. You're going to love this episode, particularly if you are an introvert or you love one. Oh, and just a programming note, understand that the Hacking Engagement podcast is a total mom and pop operation. My lovely wife is the voice of the Hacking Engagement podcast. I tape these episodes in my classroom or at home in my bedroom with my laptop, and sometimes my sound quality is not what I'd like it to be. I thought last week's episode with Marlena Gross-Taylor, there was not the greatest Skype connection. And on this episode, there's an echo in my voice when I ask a question. But believe me, Crissy comes through loud and clear. So just put up with my echo a little bit. I think I got the problem figured out, and it's not going to be an issue in the future. But I apologize. But the content's too good. It won't take away from the content, believe me. Hey, so get this, listener. My publisher contacts me and says, "I love the way Hacking Engagement is selling. How about doing 50 more?" I was all over it like a cheap suit. So the name of the book is Hacking Engagement Again, 50 Teacher Tools That Will Make Students Love Your Class. And it's going to be available on Amazon's virtual shelves in the late summer of 2017. In the meantime, if you're looking for more teacher empowerment resources, as always, visit hacklearning.org. Now let's get back to the solutions part of the Hacking Engagement podcast. So here we are in the Room 111 studios. But again, my guest isn't here. My guest is out east in Montvale, New Jersey. Her name is Crissy Romano. Good morning, Crissy Romano.
Good morning.
Oh, that beautiful Eastern accent. I love it. You know something? I think, and you know this as a person from the Garden State, that New Jersey gets a bad rap, right?
That is true.
And I have to tell you something, Crissy. One of the best days of my life was hiking the Appalachian Trail in the Delaware Water Gap between Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Have you been to the Delaware Water Gap?
Yes, I have. It's absolutely beautiful.
Well, there's an old saying that when you're on the Appalachian Trail, that Pennsylvania is where boots go to die. But what I found was the New Jersey side actually had massive boulders.
Yes.
It was incredible. And I was in 30 feet of a black bear, which was terrifying.
That happened to my husband last spring, actually. Same thing. He was actually a little bit closer than 30 feet.
Oh, gosh.
just jumped out of nowhere. That was terrifying.
Well, I was unfortunately with an 18-year-old young man that was full of testosterone who was determined to investigate the situation. I was just, dude, shut up and be still. I mean, the bear doesn't see us, so we have to cope with a lot of youthful exuberance in our lives, don't we?
Yes, we do.
which is a blessing and a curse.
Exuberance or stupidity in that case.
Well, listen, man, I have to ask you this question.
Sure.
I took the Myers Briggs personality test about 20 years ago, and I ended up with ENFP. Have you ever taken the Myers Briggs?
I have.
What'd you end up with?
I do not remember the letters off the top of my head.
Okay.
It prepped me for that one. I did not remember. But what did your results, what does that mean to you?
Well, the part that's relevant to our conversation was on the introvert-extrovert scale, I was definitely on the extrovert side.
That is not a shocker. That does not.
Were you on the extrovert side or the introvert side?
No, I'm on the introvert side.
Well, see, that's just awesome. I'm so glad to hear that, because I mean, you're a person who speaks from authority on this subject. It's not like you're some extrovert trying to figure introverts out. You are an introvert. Yes,
I am. Although most people don't believe it at first when they hear that.
Okay. This is a perfect segue, because before this episode, I did some research.
Hey.
And I'm looking for famous people, important people that are introverts.
And there's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them, and like you just said with your example, I wouldn't have thought that. So I've got Albert Einstein.
Yep.
Rosa Parks.
Yep.
Bill Gates.
Mm-hmm.
Isaac Newton.
Yes.
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Keep going. There's a whole lot.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Yes.
Abe Lincoln.
Yep.
Mahatma Gandhi.
Yes.
Michael Jordan.
Yes.
Charles Darwin.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Seuss.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Barack Obama.
Yep.
I'll be darned, man. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, man.
Introverts rule the world.
Well, and that's why I want to ask you right now, what is an introvert?
So it's not what most people think. So I'll just start there. There's a lot of misconceptions about introversion. And the number one misunderstanding is that people assume that introverts are shy. Mm-hmm. Many are, and if you look at that list of people that you mentioned, you probably would describe them as, although they were great leaders or are great leaders, you would probably describe many of them as on the quieter side.
Right.
But that is not necessarily the case. So when many people see me and they hear when I do write and speak about introversion, people are always a little confused by that. They're like, but you're friendly and you have no problem getting up in front of a crowd, and you don't necessarily have issues, talking in front of people, and you're not really shy. And I said, yes, that's true, but that's not really what introversion is about. Introverts are, I think, the key to introversion is the way we react to stimuli.
Yeah.
We prefer quiet, low-key environments, and that's where we really thrive. Uh-huh. And that's the way that we re-energize and gain focus. Whereas extroverts thrive in groups and being around others, and they like to be the center of attention and all of that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's that big misconception. There's that situational shyness, though, I have to say. Mm-hmm. I was at a conference 2 years ago, the ESET 2 New Jersey, Pennsylvania conference, and I walked in with a group of people, which were my friends. There were a bunch of us that went together. And when you got there and you got your little name tag, I can't remember if it was a color or a number, but you had to sit with that color or number at that table. And when we all looked at them, we were all separated. Or a couple of them were together, but I was separated from the group. Mm-hmm. That completely set the tone for me for the entire conference because it made me extremely uncomfortable. So I go over and I walk over to this table, and they were lovely people. In the end, they turned out to be lovely, kind, friendly. But I went into like panic mode. I was like, wow, like here I am sitting with 9 other people, complete, total strangers. And it was painful. It was really a painful situation. Now, the average person that knows me would never probably think that that was the case, but that's the introversion in me.
What was it about that situation that unnerved you?
I think I was definitely out of my comfort zone. I knew that I was going to be forced to make small talk, which is excruciating for introverts. When we talk, like, we tend to like to just get right to it. Like, I'll admit, like, they're...
I'm going to drive you insane in this podcast.
So, there are people that say to me, Chris, my God, like, you could say hello, because there's sometimes I'll just walk right up and I'm just like, listen, and I'll just ask my question or get right to it. And that's just the way introverts, kind of tend to be. Yes, small talk is rough. It's hard. So yeah, that kind of like set the stage. It's that situational shyness. And again, people that know me, and if I'm comfortable with you, and Jim, I'm comfortable with you. We've bantered back and forth quite a bit.
We traded Bitmojis.
Yes, we traded our Bitmojis. So if this was the first conversation that you and I had, you probably would see a different side of me.
Okay, let me ask you this. So would you say that most introverts grow into a comfort level with public speaking and being on stage and being the center of attention?
I would not say most.
Okay.
I would say some, and it's those that choose that.
Because I look at that list that I read down for you, and it seemed like many of those people were definitely the center of attention. Probably some on that list were more comfortable with it than others. I would say that Rosa Parks probably wasn't exceptionally comfortable with it. I think Einstein loved it. I think Michael Jordan loved it. I'd say Darwin probably wanted nothing to do with it. I think Eleanor Roosevelt kind of grew to accept it and then and then knew her role. So how would you describe your journey?
I'm still a work in progress when it comes to that. There's always like that time and the place. So for me, I tend not to like the spotlight.
Right.
I don't like my picture being taken. I despise being on video. I'm very happy that this conversation is on Skype with no video.
Okay.
Because it makes me self-conscious. That's, for me, that's what it is. It's that self-consciousness. I was actually at a conference this past weekend, and I had to speak. I had to give a speech. I had to do the cultivating a calling, like my why, like what drives me, what brings me to education and continues. I'm in year 25, so it's like, well, why? Like, why am I still here? Why am I still doing it?
Right.
And, I speak in front of people all the time. I mean, as a teacher, I speak in front of my children. I speak in front of, the parents. I'm also a Google trainer. I'm an innovation specialist, so I go into districts and I work with, strangers all the time. But it's, it's on a smaller scale, and it's not anything personal. I'll be talking about like technology or whatever. But this was my story. This was a very personal, conversation that I was really having with a room full of 200 something people.
Right.
That was nerve-wracking for me. Absolutely nerve-wracking. But I did it. So I wasn't comfortable, and I had to practice a lot. I had to have a little bit of an adult beverage beforehand
to
get me up there. I had a hard time looking out at the audience, and I know that's not a sign of a good speaker. It was very hard for me to make eye contact when I did, from time to time when I did look up. And here's the kind of like the funny part of it for me was, when all was said and done, I said, thank you for listening. And I just walked away with head down, like literally like, covering my face, head down. It was just over. I just needed to get out of there. And when I got back to the table, a friend of mine put his arm around me and he goes, Crissy, look around. And I looked up, and every person in the room was standing.
Wow.
and clapping. He's like, that's a standing ovation. I was like, oh my God. I'm like, why? Like, I just didn't understand it. But, you know, and then somebody said to me afterwards, they're like, when you get a standing ovation, like you should stand there, lift your head and thank the audience. When you walk away like that, it's like you're dismissing them. I was like, oh my God. And I was so upset by that. This is the next day. I was like, oh my God, that's not what I meant. I just couldn't handle 200 sets of eyes staring at me.
Well, you know what? That's a fascinating story. Don't worry about that. I had a girl that I had a crush on in college, and it seemed like the less attention I paid to her, the more she liked me. And so this segues right into, that's a great story. This segues right into what I want to ask you, because I think that there's this tremendous tendency amongst extroverts like myself to try to help introverts become more like us, which is a ridiculous objective. Are introverts undervalued in our schools?
I think they're undervalued. I think they're also misunderstood.
Right.
Both of my children are introverts, and my daughter is a more outgoing introvert, a little bit more like me. And I'll explain why we come across that way. There's a strategy. It's not natural for us, but it's a coping mechanism, really. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about, like how teachers can help kids.
Right.
But my son is the classic introvert. He's the very shy, quiet one. At first when he went into pre-K, they thought something was wrong with him because he wouldn't speak in class. My kid talks when he's comfortable and if he's comfortable, and if not, he's a man of very few words. I should say the boy of very few words. But when he does open his mouth, it's like astounding what comes out. That's a real introvert right there.
How old is your son?
He's 13.
Does he like school?
No.
Okay. Why?
He thinks a lot of it is pointless, to be honest with you. He'd much rather do other things. He also doesn't like, I guess, the fact that, and this is my point about how introverts are definitely not really nurtured in schools, and schools are failing introverts.
Right. Because
extroversion is seen as the ideal.
Right.
It is what, teachers look for in students. Think about it. When you're standing at the front of a classroom and you're asking a question and you want to pick on the kid that's the first one to raise their hand.
Or when you ask for student volunteers, boy, they're the first ones up. They're trying stuff.
Right. And what happens is in many cases, those shyer kids or the quiet ones or the introverts, or for whatever the reason that they're quiet, they usually need just an extra minute. We process things a little bit differently. We need a little extra time. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, my son is now in 8th grade. Every single year, parent-teacher conferences, interim report cards, whatever, progress reports, whatever you want to call them, Christopher needs to participate more. And my response when we sit in these meetings is, how about you find a way for him to participate in a different way?
Right.
Because he's never going to be the kid to raise his hand. Never. But I'm going to tell you, when he does, get involved in a discussion, he has a lot to say.
And I have some ideas on that, too, when we start talking about that, because I've thought a lot about this. Because I am so extroverted, and the last thing I want is for a kid to feel like they need to be like me, because the world doesn't function if we're all the same, man.
You're right.
And that leads to my question. So what are some strengths that a lot of introverts have that aren't always inventoried?
I think probably one of the most valuable assets that we have is we're keen observers. We notice everything. We take everything in. We're always watching. We're always listening. We're good listeners. We tend to be creative. Like for me, I'm not artistic. I can't draw. Like I don't have that. Like as a teacher, bulletin boards, oh God, they're a nightmare for me because I never know what to put. I'm not creative in that way, but I'm a writer.
Right.
So even today, preparing for this interview, I really had to sit and think and process everything. I could never just have this conversation on the fly. And it's not that I don't know what I'm talking about. I mean, hello, I am an introvert. I live it, so I do know it. But I need that time to process. And as a, I do much better with writing. So if that speech, going back to that speech at that conference, if I had to just get up there on the fly, I wouldn't be able to get my words out. Mm-hmm. I know what I want to say. It was my personal story. I lived it. So again, I know the content. But as a writer, I mean, for me, that speech was an example of my writing.
Let me ask you this. It seems to me that introverts go deeper.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like there's differences in individuals, but it seems to me like extroverts are pretty surface. Introverts go deeper. What a strength that is.
Yes. And it's funny. I think another thing that most introverts would probably say, we have a lot of conversations in our heads.
Right.
We do a lot of talking in our heads. And it doesn't necessarily always, come out to the other person or the people that are there. That's why I find parties, holidays difficult. And here's another interesting thing. Introverts tend to surround themselves with extroverts. My best friends are extroverts. My husband is an extrovert. It's a way for us to kind of find balance and kind of learn how to live in that other world. Because we do. I mean, even though 1/3 to 1/2 of the population of the world are introverts, extroverts definitely seem to have the spotlight for sure.
Do you think, that's a great statement, do you think that most introverts wish they were more extroverted?
I don't know. I couldn't speak for most. Mm-hmm. I'm very happy with who I am. Mm-hmm. And I've also, grown, I guess, into my introversion. And first of all, let me just say this. I didn't know what my story was. Like, I didn't know what introversion really was until I heard Susan Cain's TED Talk about a year ago. Mm-hmm. And she is the foremost authority on introversion in general. She's written 2 books, and she's done this TED Talk that millions of people have seen.
We'll put a link on the show notes, definitely.
I'm sorry, what was that?
We'll put a link on the show notes, definitely.
Sure. Yeah, her TED Talk is phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And, for me, it's like my first husband used to call me an ice queen. Mm. And he was like, you border on rude. And, you're not friendly. And like all these very negative things. And it was hurtful. And I was like, but I don't feel that way, like on the inside. Right. And a lot of it was that his entire family was extremely extroverted, very loud, very boisterous. And when I was around them, I couldn't handle it. It was just too much stimulation. It was too much going on. I would always go hide in the bathroom at holidays. I just needed a break to decompress from all of the noise and the conversation and the laughter, which is all great stuff.
Right.
It's just I can only handle it in small doses. And I think most introverts will say the same. It's not that we don't like being in crowds, and it's not that we don't like being around people, and it's not that we're not friendly. We just can't do it for extended periods of time. It wipes us out. I mean, really.
I find what you're saying so interesting because I'm one of those guys. I'm one of those really loud people. And I'm thinking about my class, and I'm thinking about some kid that's sitting in there that's introverted thinking, why is this guy talking so loud? Why is that necessary?
It's not only just talking loud, but I get the impression there's probably a lot of movement there. You fill a room.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes, I think of extroverts as sucking all the air out of the room.
No
but
kidding.
They don't give us a place to breathe.
Right. Well, then let's start talking about this. So an extroverted teacher like myself asks for volunteers. I get all the other extroverts to put their hands up. I'm really excited to look at my extroverted students' presentations because they're just full of energy. They're kind of like the way I would present. What does participation look like to an introvert?
What does it look like to an introvert? Wow, it's. I guess it's different. I guess it's. I'm probably. I don't want to say more extroverted introvert, but I'm not the quiet, shy one for the most part.
Right.
So for people like me, like I am the one that is the first to raise their hands, even though I am an introvert. And here's the interesting thing: it's a strategy that many of us learned very early in life to deal with the anxiety and the panic that comes when a teacher asks a question.
Right.
And, you know the answer because most of us are smart, we're intelligent people. But we strike first. It's a strategy a lot of us use. So even though you see a lot of those waving hands, we're probably not the waving hands, but we will be probably one of the first ones to raise our hand or participate. And most people think that I'm an extrovert because I always sit in the front of the room, no matter where I am.
Right.
Strategy behind that too. It's like I don't want to see other people turning around, looking at me like when I'm talking or when I'm sharing.
Right.
I am one of the ones that strikes first and raises her hand, and my daughter is the same way.
Right.
Because we just need to get it out there. Because if we sit and we have that information and we know we want to answer, eventually the anxiety and the nervousness takes over, and then we'll never participate.
And you know what? I mean, I hear you talking, and I can picture incredible numbers of students in my head right now that I have in class. This conversation we're having, I'm hoping it's helping others as much as it's helping me. It's very important.
Yeah, and when you look at the actual statistics, 1/3 to 1/2 of the population in general are introverts. So just scale that down to the kids sitting in your class.
Well, then let's start giving people some advice. How can teachers support in introverts?
I think first and foremost, it's all about relationships and building rapport with your kids from the get-go. So one of the things I always tell the parents at back to school night is, you're not going to see a ton of content. I teach elementary school now, and even at the middle level when I was there for 15 years. I spend the first chunk of the 2 weeks, 3 weeks of school building relationships with the kids. We do a lot of activities around team building, getting to know each other, in all different sorts of ways. And as a teacher, you're able to, and maybe that's because it's usually looking in a mirror, I can see the kids that fall on that introverted side of the spectrum. Because it is a spectrum, you got that super really quiet kid, and then you have the extreme extrovert, and then there's those that kind of fall in the middle.
Okay, I'm gonna stop you and ask you a question.
Sure.
So you got your team building activities early on in the class. Some of the introverts I know, they're not too crazy about working in a group.
No, we don't like it. We tend not to like it, but there needs to be a balance.
Okay, so how do you navigate that?
So I always listen. We're going to live in the real world, and when you're in the real world, you need to know how to collaborate, communicate, and work as a team. It's a life skill. We need to be able to do it. We are living in a world of extroverts, so we need to know how to function. Okay. So if we did not do collaborative work, that would be a great disservice to our students. So let me just put that out there, So with that all being said, I do a lot of team building and collaborative work in class, but I give the kids the opportunity to step away and have individual time to process. So for an example, we did the classic spaghetti tower with the marshmallow at the top team building activity. That was one of the first days. I think I did it the second day of school this year. So I gave the kids the opportunity to think and plan on their own. Then they came together and they thought and they planned together as a team. And then they started the actual, creation process, the building process. And then I gave them a timeout, which deviates from the typical plan that you see if you Google around and you look for the spaghetti tower thing. There's lots of lesson plans out there. So I deviate from that. And then I tell the kids, all right, we're going to take a quick 2-minute break. I want you guys to just think and process.
Right.
So it's quiet. The room settles down. Kids have the time to process. I walk around, and for those that are still a little bit animated, give them a little, touch on the shoulder, just, take a minute, breathe, settle down, and then come back together. I kind of build that time in because that's what we as introverts need. It's hard for us to think with all the chaos and commotion. And when kids are doing these sorts of STEM challenges, team building sorts of things, it is a little chaotic. There is a lot of commotion. And it's hard for us to think straight. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm going to tell you it's interesting what you're saying, because as an extrovert, I don't feel right as a teacher unless my students are doing something productive. And so, like we have those little thought times. That's really hard for me as a teacher to allow to happen, because I look over here and some kids are just kind of distracted and doing something else. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my kids aren't being productive. So that's something that I need to work on. I need to cope with my feelings on that after hearing the tremendous value that times like that have.
And the interesting thing is some of those kids that to you may seem distracted, it's our way of gaining focus. Right. Like I'm a doodler, not a sketch noter, because again, I don't have that artistic, I'm not like John Spencer, who I think he's a fellow introvert, but he's extremely creative and artistic. So I have that creative side, just not the artistic side, but I am a doodler. And I used to be the one, I went to Catholic school as a kid, and oh boy, those nuns, they loved me because I was always there, like just doodling. And I always looked like I was daydreaming. Right. But I was totally tuned in to everything that they were saying. Exactly. I was one of those kids that needed to walk over to the window to just feel that sun on my face just so I could think.
So I need to, and probably a lot of teachers like me and your nuns back from your childhood, we just need to chill out, man, have some empathy, and just allow this quiet time when introverts need to think.
Yeah, we have to value the whole child, and I think that's what a lot of teachers, not that they do it intentionally, because I do not believe that teachers ever walk into the classroom with the intention of harming kids or doing wrong by their kids, right? Everybody wants to do the best for their kids. I just think that, not everybody knows how to attend to the needs of the whole child. Like there's that social emotional piece that a lot of teachers miss. And it's not through any fault of their own. It's just, we have a lot of pressures on us in the classroom to teach the standards and prep the kids for the test and, hit the curriculum. And, I always laugh when teachers say, I'm an English teacher, I'm a science teacher, and I will stop them and say, no, you're a teacher of children. You teach kids, and then the content comes later. Because if we don't attend to that social emotional side, if we don't pay attention to the different needs that kids have outside of the content, they're never going to learn from us.
That's beautiful, man. Now I'm gonna ask you something straight up, and I don't know how you're going to answer. I have no idea. But this is something I was thinking about prepping for this conversation. So there's a tool called Pear Deck, which you may or may not be familiar with.
Sure.
And it's a way to embed questions in a presentation, and then the question comes up on the student's device, and they have a little time to respond to it. Then the responses are visible, but they're anonymous. Now, let's say that you're an introvert and you're in my class, and I ask a very provocative question. Would you, I know you can't speak for everyone, but would you, if you were a student in my class, feel comfortable with that method of expressing yourself?
I would be much more likely to give a true, honest answer in that scenario than having to raise my hand and say it out loud.
Right.
So there's, I think that's a great segue into a lot of tech tools that are on the market right now for teachers to make use of. Now, the key here is you want the kids to be able to collaborate and be a part of a discussion. And all introverts are not created equal, right? So there's some that are a little bit more comfortable with, sharing than others. So some of the ones that I really like for that anonymous piece is Padlet.
Yeah, sure.
DotStorm. Right. DotStorm is another one. I love that one. Pear Deck, Nearpod. Those are all great. But then there are also the other tools that allow you to participate. There's a video piece to it, like Recap, Flipgrid,
Right.
Seesaw, and I forgot Today's Meet. That kind of goes in the other category.
Right. Now,
so somebody like me, I'm not a fan of the video.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that because I did Flipgrid yesterday, and I was thinking about it again in terms of coming on this app. And I have to tell you, most of the kids were really excited about it, and they liked how easy it was, and they liked the funny pictures. But that would really unnerve some kids, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yeah, and I actually have not been using Flipgrid yet in my classroom, and I've been super excited and stoked to do it.
Okay.
But I have a couple of kids that I know it would put them into a sense of panic.
I have an idea
to go on video.
I have an idea for you when it comes to Flipgrid. So next week I'm going to have my students interview somebody. So in other words, their Flipgrid is actually going to be videotaping someone else.
That's a great idea.
So that might be an option for you.
Yeah, and the other tool that I've been using a lot, I started using last year, and I've been using it a lot this year, is Seesaw.
Mm-hmm. I'm not
because it gives kids the option. So if I give them a prompt, or I want them to respond to something specific, they have choice in how they respond. They can write a note. They can do a drawing. They can do a little selfie video if they want.
Right.
So it doesn't force them into the video piece like Flipgrid and Recap kind of, that's what it is. It's all about that video piece.
Right.
And I'll tell you a quick little interesting story. Ed Camp, New Jersey is a huge Ed Camp that's hosted in the Central Jersey area every November. And I'm one of the lead organizers on that team. So this year, one of the other organizers, who is as extroverted as extroverts get, much like yourself, Jim, decided that we're going to do a Flipgrid. Why Ed Camp? What's the value of Ed Camp? And I missed that part of it. We do a lot of planning on Voxer, and I was busy those couple of days, and I missed that piece of the conversation.
Right.
So everybody jumped on board. Yeah, let's do this. Flipgrid. It's going to be great. We'll get a whole bunch of us on the team go in, drop our videos so people can see the value, and we'll promote it, and hopefully get more people at Ed Camp. So somebody sideboxed me and was like, "Where's your Flipgrid?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And they explained it to me. I was like, yeah.
I don't want to
do
that.
About that.
That's right.
So then the response was, "You're a lead organizer, Chris. You have to do it. It looks really bad if you don't." Mm-hmm. So I just took a deep breath. I was like, okay, I'm going to take one for the team.
Right.
I'm going to do this. Send me the Flipgrid link. So I had to think about the questions, and me being me with my type A personality on top of the introversion, wrote it all down. Do you know I still haven't done it?
Oh,
I will do it because I made that up. I said I would do it.
Yeah.
And I when I promise something, I will absolutely follow through.
Another great thing about introverts.
every time I sit down to do it, I literally get sick to my stomach.
Okay.
It's stupid. I just wish that I could get past that.
All right, so let's talk about that for just a second. Again, I mean, this does have potential to be a really good presentation on your part. So if you have those kids in your class that are introverts, they could interview someone, or perhaps they could do Flipgrids in groups.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, I think there's a way to not have to thrust someone on camera that doesn't want to do it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's the worst part, I think, for anybody is, forcing them to do something they're not comfortable with.
I like the word thrust.
But that's what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
It's my husband is mentoring a first-year teacher at the middle school that he teaches at, and she does this thing where she asks students to come to the board to solve their problems. She's a math teacher, and then she asks them to do a little dance, like when they get it right, kind of like what football players do in an end zone, like that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So he's sitting at the back of the class because he actually pushes into that class every day, one period, and as like a support for her.
Yeah.
And he came, and knowing that I am the way I am and our children are the way they are, he came up to her one day and he's like, listen, he's like, you're really good and you know your content and you're off to a great start. He goes, but you're losing about 6 or 7 of the kids in the class. She's like, I don't get it. I don't know what you mean. He goes, if you realize that like they never volunteer to go up and they never will. She didn't understand that.
Right.
Because going up and sharing their answer, although they're probably some of the smartest kids in the class, they will never, ever do the little dance. Like me, you will never see me on a dance floor unless I have lots of drinks in me. Like that'll never happen. It's just we don't, for the most part, introverts do not like that spotlight, that focus in that manner.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Because I would have been much like that young teacher and not really processing this. I mean, age does wonders for you in terms of perspective and empathy and all that. Well, in some cases. Some cases not. But what's it look like when an introvert is thriving in your classroom?
You know, I have the kids at the beginning of the school year where they were just very serious. They just seem to come across very somber and serious. And I'm starting to see the smiles on their faces.
Right.
I'm starting to see them participate in that traditional manner that we're all used to, a little bit more. I'm seeing them embrace their passions, things that they're actually interested in. So, you know, I give my kids we have a hard academic schedule this year. We go from 8:20 to 12:35, straight academic with no break. So I give, and these are 4th graders, right? These are, 9-year-old kids. And so it's rough. By hour 3, they're fried. And then we still have to do math. So I give them a 10 or 15 minute break. And at the beginning of the year, and it's literally a break. Eat your snack, use the restroom, do whatever you need to do to re-energize, decompress, whatever you need to do. And those kids that would, the beginning of school, went off on their own, did their own thing. I'm starting to see now they're almost buddying up with another kid that's kind of like them. They're still, it's kind of like when you look at toddlers and they call it parallel play. They're still sitting there next to each other with their headphones on, doing their own thing, but they're together.
But
it's like they found each other.
But they are not transforming into extroverts.
No, they're not. They're more comfortable in their own skin. And I think also they, I provide that nurturing environment for them that, and I obviously value what they bring to the table.
Okay.
And I allow those opportunities. And I think that there's just a level of comfort that they feel when they're in the room. And I think you can just see that. You could see that they open up a little bit more, that they offer themselves up a little bit more. When we do a lot of turning and talking, so they can turn and talk with a partner instead of having to share with the whole class. I see that they're much more likely to share their thinking, have that conversation. And now I'm starting to see some of those kids actually participate in the whole group.
Hey, I'll tell you what, this program has been very important for me. Sometimes I look at this as almost professional development, this whole podcast. I've learned so much by just interviewing people like yourself. This one's been important for me, Crissy.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because we all have those types of kids sitting in our classrooms, walking on through the halls, sitting on our buses. We encounter them all the time.
Right.
And we need to just be aware that, there's a lot of talk about differentiation in the classroom, and it's always talking about content, how to differentiate content.
And those are just thrilling conversations, aren't they?
Yeah, right. But it's necessary.
There's also a lot of talk about diversity, and we tend to look at gender, religion, ethnicity. There's a lot of diversity that we don't think about or talk about. Right, and that's a piece that's often missing. So I mean, I'm hoping from the writing that I do. I'm actually writing a book about introverts. I just started it. I'm just getting the outline together. I'm hoping that it's going to be picked up by a publisher, but I my fingers are crossed, and I have
I feel very confident that it will. But it really is more of like a guide for teachers and a guide for parents. It's actually going to be 2 books in one. I don't know if you remember back in the 90s, you would look at those books and it would have a cover on one side, and then you would flip it over, and then it would be another book, another cover. It's that kind of thing. So half the book is really a guide for teachers, how to nurture, introverts and the quiet kids in the classroom. And then the flip side of that is like another version of the book. It's for parents, how to nurture your kids. Because I know they're your children, but if you're not an introvert and you're raising an introverted child, I see it all the time.
Yeah,
it's like,
listen, you're talking about my life here. I'm following you.
It when it comes out.
Yeah, I'm following you.
Copy.
Hey, listen, man, I'm going to do something right now, and I want you to close your eyes and try to figure out what's going on, okay?
Okay.
You know what I just did?
Was that the standing ovation?
Oh, you got it. Good job. See, you introverts think about things. If I would have asked an extrovert that question, they wouldn't have got it. They said, yes, you're clapping. They would have missed the whole subtlety of me doing something that you can't even see. Bravo, young lady.
Thank you.
Hey, one piece of advice for a teacher tomorrow going in that has some kids that they're worried about, gosh, are they interested in my class? They don't say anything. They seem withdrawn. Give them a piece of advice.
I would say pull up next to them and just try to start a conversation.
Not
try
about
to
school.
get to know the kids as kids.
Yeah, not about school. All right. Well, Crissy, you've been wonderful today. I've learned so much from you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know what it's like in Jersey, but here in Ohio, the colors are starting to pop, baby. Is that what you're experiencing?
Not quite yet. It's still pretty green. It's hazy, hot, and humid here. It's like in the 80s today. So it doesn't really quite feel like fall. It's a little bit of that like Indian summer kind of going on today.
Well, we live in a woods full of hardwood maples, and they are starting to turn red and gold, baby.
Beautiful.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So here we are at the What You Can Do Tomorrow section, and I have to tell you, when it comes to this subject, I needed to record this episode. I needed to hear what Crissy had to say to me. It's important for me to remember that kids might be wired totally different than I am. As far as what you can do tomorrow, think about this. Think about inserting some quiet, contemplative time into your lesson. Allow those kids that are introverts time to process what you're asking without nervously racing ahead to the next activity, which I sometimes do. I need to work on this. Something else, utilize a tech tool like Pear Deck or like Padlet or like Today's Meet where the students can participate anonymously. That will take great pressure off those kids that are introverts. If you're going to use a pretty audacious platform like Flipgrid, give the kids the options to maybe tape somebody else instead of themselves. And finally, if you want to bond with your introverts, you do what you do with all kids. You just start talking to them, man. And I'm not talking about school stuff. Maybe ask them what their favorite pizza is or what they have for a snack when they get home or just, what's their dog's name? Something like that. Something off the typical repertoire of, did you get your homework done? And don't be dissuaded by the fact that this kid might be standoffish. They might be just a little shy. So you're the adult. Come on, man. Step up and put yourself out there. And good luck tomorrow engaging your students.
Show notes for this episode can be found at janesallensturnevant.com. If you enjoy Hacking Engagement, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes.